Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 22nd of September 2025, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. Delighted to have Ben Rubin with me in the studio. We'll also be joined by Sandi Adams today on Live Link. Now, we've got a pretty heavy news because a lot of the information coming into the public domain is by its very nature, it's subject heavy, and we do need to cover that, but we will try and lighten the mood as we progress through today's news. We're going to start off by having a look at what a wonderful war. It's very clear that the British government is now very, very excited at the possibility it can help engineer a war between NATO and Russia. And there's unlimited money for new military projects. And don't worry, because the country is going to be saved by using war as the opportunity to improve our business and trading situation. But on top of that, we've got in the background the risk of casualties, of course, from any conflict. But if that isn't enough to deal with the population, the assisted dying bill is coming along quite nicely, and Sandy's going to be having a look at that. She'll also be having a look at the Corporate Transparency Act, where every detail of you has to be known by the government before you're going to be allowed to run a business of any sort. And Ben, you've really got the lion's share today, which is having a look at the propaganda and mind control through the government. Interestingly enough, some of that takes us back to UK Column printed edition in 2011. And finally, we're going to end with a little bit of black humour on BBC Shorts. So let's kick off with Ukraine and the ramping up for war. And it's pretty obvious. If we go to Defence HQ, we've got tweet after tweet, or X post if you prefer, talking about jobs, 1,000 jobs in helping to ramp up the drone industry. We've got building military aircraft for the US Air Force. That'll be with Boeing, an American company, but apparently that's good for the UK. We've got a 200 million transformation fund for the military construction facilities in Barrow-in-Furness. We've got another £1.5 billion for Palantir Tech. And we are going to be, quote, accelerating UK defence towards war-fighting readiness. So they're not messing around, Ben. They're using the terms we're going to war. And what better way to help the process than for people to be spreading this kind of material? So a little video clip that Philip Ingram, who's very big with the Times, posted showing flight paths of those nasty Russians, because Russia dared send a few jets down to Kaliningrad, and also there were some overflights. Of course, NATO's never been guilty of this at all, well, apart from Reaper drones entering Russian airspace over the Black Sea during the conflict that's been ongoing. But little clips like this, all designed to ramp up fear in people and, of course, move us even closer towards a proper full-blown war with the Russians. Now, on one hand, you might be relieved to know that UK sent jets into Poland to fire a warning shot to Putin to stay out of NATO territory. So the text was pretty clear. John Healey said that he was giving a clear signal to Russia that NATO airspace will be defended. And how many British jets went into the area? Well, it was the sum of 2. So I've no doubt, Ben, the Russians were quaking in their boots. But if we want to see how the UK manipulates the agenda with regard to the Russians, no better place to go than the Times Radio. So let's have a look at this podcast.
John Killett, your first question comes in, says, since NATO is a defensive organisation, why and how does Putin think it's an offensive organisation? That is a very simple question, asking a very complex question, and it is one that you have to put yourself into Vladimir Putin's perspective. Putin wants an enemy, and if we go from the end of the Second World War through the Cold War, who was the Soviet Union's enemy and who does Putin see as the enemy in the future? Well, the Soviet Union's enemy was what became NATO, and then Putin has taken that up and continued seeing NATO as an enemy. And there's no point in trying to persuade your people that your enemy is only there to defend if you attack. You want to make it the big bad wolf. And that's what Putin has been doing the whole way through. In fact, that's what the Soviet Union did the whole way through. NATO was the big bad wolf. And of course, whenever you look at it in the cold light of day on paper, NATO has expanded. It's grown. And it's grown east into a lot of the countries that were former members of the Warsaw Pact. And Putin has seen that expansionism as something that is designed, in his words, to be an aggressive look against Russia, and therefore suggesting that it is a threat against Russia. He doesn't care about the reality of what NATO is or the NATO's constitution or anything else. And of course, we've had Russians up until just before their invasion, full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Russians were embedded in NATO headquarters. They've been working with NATO for many years. Russians have deployed under the command of NATO-led operations in the Balkans, and they haven't complained before. So Putin knows exactly what NATO is, but NATO's expanded. For those that don't know, NATO doesn't expand by going out to different countries and saying, hey, we see that you're butting up against a potential enemy. Would you like to come and join us? Here's our help to get you over the line to come and join. No, NATO sits and waits. It waits for countries to turn around and say, can we join? You have to apply to join. And then whenever they apply to join, they have to meet quite a large number of political and military standards before they are accepted into the overall NATO framework.
So truly incredible little clip, because in attempting to spin the propaganda against Putin, what he does is actually describes the very mechanism by which NATO has conducted an aggressive movement east, contrary to all the promises to the Russians. And it's coming out as this man gives the little clips of how things go. But of course, his initial history, he doesn't tell the audience that immediately after the defeat of Germany, the Russians moved 2 million men from Western Europe all the way across Russia in order to fight the Japanese and kick them out of China. He doesn't mention that. He doesn't mention Operation Unthinkable, which is Churchill's plans for the Western allies to actually attack the Russians in order to claim more of European territory. So he seems pretty weak on that, but nevertheless, he's put up as Times newspaper as an expert. But if we have a look at his, here we go. If we have a look at his Twitter account, X, he describes himself as an ex-military spook and planner. And then he says, specialised, let's bring that up on screen, specialised in taking over countries, tongue-in-cheek. Ben, why would you make a comment like that unless you'd actually been engaged in that very thing, getting inside countries, breaking down the bona fide political system in order to insert the EU agenda or the NATO agenda? This man is effectively boasting that he's been in the game in order to inflame the situation in Eastern Europe, while saying, well, no, NATO, of course, is there to just protect the West as a defensive organisation. Propaganda, quite unbelievable. But the other place we need to go for propaganda is Defence HQ. This is from their Twitter page itself. And what we've got is a commentary, supposedly, on what's happening in Ukraine itself. It says here the logistics hub of Pokrovsk remains the focal point for the Russian offensive operations. And this is absolutely true. But of course, defence intelligence doesn't give the UK public the truth that the city is operationally encircled and the Russian forces have already taken key parts of the southern city's defences. If we go on through, it's talking about major elements of Russia's naval infantry being transferred from the Kursk region to Pokrovsk. But of course, it's then saying to start offensive activity in small groups. Well, the truth is that the Russian troops have successfully used small groups of men to break fortified positions and take territory for months at a time. And if we deal with the second point that they make, is that Russians have also taken the Srebrenica forest, which is a massive area. They've successfully taken that by massive use of bombs, rockets, and artillery, which the Ukrainians don't have, supported by small groups of men. So it's basically propaganda by omission from Defence HQ, but we need to identify it. And if we go on to the last point here, where it's saying that the Russian forces have consolidated control over sectors of the areas bordering Dnipropetrovsk and the Donetsk Oblast. However, many of these are still contested. In reality, the Russians are continuing to break through Ukrainian front lines, largely across the whole length of the front line, and they are advancing into rear areas, taking more ground. And this is why NATO is getting so spooked at the moment, because having denied the Russians were moving forward, that's exactly what they're doing. And so if we analyse what Defence HQ has been doing, this is deliberately misleading propaganda, which is designed to ramp up fear of Russia and to hide the truth about the war in Ukraine. Now, instead of going to this despicable UK government organisation for information, there are many extremely good online analysts of the war. We've supported a whole range of them over the time that the war has been in place. And if we have a look at Pokrovsk here, which they've been talking about, the first thing to understand is that the area itself is encircled by the Russians. And although they haven't, if you like, joined the full circle, they have fire control over the western road into this area. So there's no doubt that Mirnograd and Pokrovsk are both now encircled. And if we just show the two areas, we've got two large town, small city areas together. And both of these are now held in the Russian encirclement. And you can see by the extensive area in pink around it, the size of the Russian progress. I'm just going to say this has come from the Military Summary channel, so credit for this excellent analysis. And if we have a look in a bit more detail, we can see the yellow arrows there, which are showing the likely Ukrainian escape routes for their forces that are being encircled, and you can see the formation of the Russian pincer, which is ultimately going to take the city. And there's no question that this is going to happen. If we have a look at Kupiansk, we can see a similar encirclement happening. The Russians, in this case, approaching from the northwest, and the flags with the areas with the Ukrainian flags on, showing largely the strongholds of the Ukrainians, which are left in Kupiansk, but the Russians are steadily encircling these. And if we translate this into reality, this is a description here, or photo showing high-rise buildings in Kupiansk, and this is really giving you the key visual for how difficult this terrain is for the Russians to fight, because you've got very flat landscape, and if you have strong multi-story buildings, these inevitably form very difficult strong points. So credit to both sides. This is brutal urban warfare, but the facts are that the Russians are steadily defeating the Ukrainians in these areas, and these are ultimately strategic defeats. Now, if we just come back to UK briefly, something which caught my attention and Charles Mallet at the end of last week was this report talking about the role of women in the UK armed forces. And if we've got somewhere about 11%, maybe more, up to 15% women in the reserve forces, well, the future is very different, because the intention is that as we ramp up for war with the Russians, we're going to ramp up to get 30% women in our armed forces. And that has all sorts of ramifications, because if we look worldwide, women are not being put onto the battlefield to fight, although there's much talk about this. When the chips are down, it's invariably the men that come forward. We'll talk about this a bit more in extra time. But let's move on from there. And welcome to you, Sandi. And if we're going to kill people on the battlefield in very large numbers, we're also targeting our elderly via the assisted dying bill.
Indeed, and not just the elderly. It's it had its second reading this week on last Friday, on the 19th of September in the Lords, and they set up a special select committee to take detailed evidence and to scrutinise the bill. The bill was formerly the Terminally Ill Adults End of Life Bill, and it cleared its second reading. So it remains on the statute book track and proceeds through the Lord's stages, obviously. Due to much opposition from some peers, rather than moving immediately to normal committee report stages, the House agreed to appoint a select committee to gather evidence from professional bodies, coroners, ministers and other bodies involved. The committee will publish the evidence it hears, but unusually it's not being asked to make amendment recommendations, which makes me feel that they are going to try and push this through without a doubt. The committee was given a reporting deadline, so they've been asked to report back by the 7th of November, which is quite soon. Ministers such as the Health and Justice Secretaries are expected to give evidence. So, it's pushing its way through. So if the Lord's bill is amended, it will return to the House of Commons for consideration of those amendments. If no blocking amendments pass, the bill can proceed through both houses towards royal assent. So there we have it. Now, there was a lot of opposition. I don't know, many people may have watched the Hansard on all this, but Baroness Finlay and Lord Daniel Moylan had something to say about this, and we've got some footage of both of those now. So if we could roll that footage.
The bill doesn't require any attempt to relieve pain or suffering, even if they're present. It puts the power in the hands of the two assessing doctors, who may know nothing about the conditions of the person, who cannot detect undue influence or coercion, and whose motivation may be opaque. Prognosis is a guess, and diagnostic errors are common. These doctors do not need to be certain. Only on the balance of probabilities do they need to believe the criteria are met. With no oversight of their assessment, how can a panel approve the death with any certainty when there is no ability to appeal against a panel approval and no coroner oversight? How many wrongful deaths a year is acceptable? No system can be 100% safe. Providing massive drug overdoses in an unlicensed way to end life is not a therapeutic act.
It's notable that the words death and dying hardly appear. The poison to be used is described as an approved substance. The still mysterious contraption by which it is to be administered is called an approved device. And the business itself, when you get to clause 25, you'll find it's headed administration of assistance, provision of assistance. Assistance, in fact, is the term used throughout the whole of the bill. Is this something that's going to become part of our daily language? Have you considered assistance, Mrs. Smith? My lords, we know what this is. It is euphemism, an old ancient Greek device for hiding from the gods through the use of flowery language, something of which you are ashamed. And that's what the language of this bill is constantly expressing at every turn. My lords, I think we are right to be ashamed of what is in this bill.
I think he spoke very eloquently. There's definitely something very shady about all of this. And obviously, Lord Falconer is the person pushing this alongside Esther Ranson, and he's a major player in pushing this bill through. Now, it's interesting. He did have to make an admission in the House of Lords, and I think we have some footage of that admission about the funding towards the assisted dying bill, and there's some shady things going on. So I'll let you make your own minds up.
My Lords, I draw attention to my entry in the Register of Members' Interests, which refers to the fact that I have an assistant funded by Bernard Lewis to assist me in the conduct of this bill, and Dignity in Dying funded the printing of literature, which I sent to your Lordships in connection with the bill. I apologise for not mentioning this in my opening speech. My Lords, this has been a debate.
So he admitted that actually that some of the literature was funded by Dignity in Dying, and these there's two companies that are intrinsically linked. It's Dignity in Dying, and the other one is I think it's called the Compassionate Dying organisation. Now, both of these are linked to the Bernard Lewis Trust, who were funding a lot of the assisted dying bill. So who owns that trust? It's the Lewis Family Trust, the Bernard Lewis Family Trust, and they're part of the River Island fame. That's where they made their money. Like most corporate capitalists, the family has its fingers in multi-nefarious pies. The founder, Bernard Lewis, is responsible for the family's fortunes. Companies House lists him alone as an active director of no fewer than 20 corporations, and another company called Cavendish Square Secretariat acts as secretary for 52 other companies. It's owned by the Lewis Trust Group. The group's portfolio spans various investment companies in England, property development in Poland, and a chain of hotels in Israel and the US. And if the company it keeps, or rather the other organisation it donates to, is anything to go by, it seems it sits very comfortably amongst neoliberal circles. So let's look at some of these organisations that received funding from Bernard Lewis Trust. Dignity in Dying, and it's got a sister company called Compassion in Dying. Now, Dignity in Dying had an income of 2.6 million in 2023, up from 1.7 million in 2022. Over 2 million was spent on lobbying, PR, media research, and funding to push the assisted dying bill. Crucially, the accounts do not disclose who the high-value donors are. Compassion in Dying charity, they show a clearer donor information. In 2023, it owed $139,000 to Dignity in Dying for staffing and overheads, meaning its donors are indirectly funding lobbying, and they are very linked, these two companies. Now, the Trust, the Bernard Lewis Trust, donated well over 1.8 million in documented donations to Dignity in Dying and Compassionate Dying. Other recipients of the Lewis Trust's money were the Conservative Party, and from Bernard Lewis personally, he donated, I think it was 46,000 to personally to the Conservative Party, as well as 52 million between 2008 and 2010. And then a network of nefarious think tank, dark think tanks, the Henry Jackson Society, the Centre for Social Justice, Policy Exchange, Demos, as well as Zionist organisations such as the Community Security Trust, and the Jewish Leadership Council. So all of this is being funded by many organisations that we have nothing, we know nothing about. They're just pushing money into this. So it's heavily funded by billionaire capitalists and opaque trusts, not grassroots donations. And the same backers also bank pro neoliberal and Zionist organisation, raising concerns that the push for assisted dying aligns with ideological and economic agendas, but that devalue vulnerable lives, both here in the UK and abroad. So let's look at the hypocrisy of the funding. 8.12 million has been spent by lobbyists and wealthy donors to promote assisted dying over roughly a decade. Meanwhile, the annual funding gap for palliative care is in the hundreds of millions. The government has reduced its funding of hospice and palliative care by 47 million in the last 18 months, with hospices forced to run cake stalls, sales, charity shops, and marathons to stay afloat. In other words, just a fraction of the private money poured into lobbying for assisted dying could have transformed palliative provision for thousands of dying people, providing pain relief, hospital beds, and support for families. It's clear that wealthy donors have chosen to bankroll campaigns that make death more accessible. Yet those same resources are not being directed towards making life until natural death more comfortable. Society is left in a position where it's easier and cheaper to promote a lethal injection than to guarantee proper palliative care. Not because of public will, but because lobbying is better funded than compassion. This is deeply concerning. And I think we have a video now from, I think his name's Dr. Miller. And he kind of puts it into perspective. And I think we should listen to this. It kind of puts it all in one place. Make your own minds up. Thank you.
That's a minor change compared with this century's growth in the world population from 6.1 billion to 8.2 billion. A 25% increase in 25 years. But just think what the 2025 numbers would be if abortion had not been legalised, or there had not been wide-scale usage and advocacy of contraception. And indeed, the growth of homosexuality throughout society has reduced the number of children we would have had the churches had their way, we would have had a very much bigger population than we presently have, facing the difficulties we have with climate change.
Well, Sandi, thank you very much for that. It's a very, very serious and, as you say, dark agenda. And it's also deeply disturbing that there's huge amounts of money coming in order effectively to lobby and manipulate the government into going down this path, when the same money spent could have a very much more human and compassionate outcome if it was put towards caring for people who were heading towards terminal illness. So lots of questions to be asked. We are a little bit uncertain about the name of the gentleman speaking there in the House of Lords. We'll check that up and we'll make sure we've got that correct in extra today, but a lot to be discussed. And Ben, this is more manipulation of politics, isn't it? And you've come in on the topic of mind control, which is the government's main agenda, it appears, at the moment.
It certainly is, yes. Well, I think that's what government is, isn't it? If we just flag this up, government, what does that mean? Mind control. That's what it's all about. Before I progress, let me just say, that was an amazing report, Sandi, and that speech at the end there just took my breath away. I can't believe that. We're going to have to talk about that more in extra, and also particularly the Henry Jackson Society, because I've been looking at them over the past week or two. So anyway, we'll come back to it. Mind control, government, what are they up to? What are they planning next? There is no better place to go to find that out than Policy Live, which happened 10 days ago, week before last, and it's powered by Nesta and the Behavioural Insights team. Nesta, the UK's social innovation agency, who are manipulating the social fabric, and the Behavioural Insights team, aka the Nudge Unit, who are manipulating our minds. Before I get into this, I'm just going to draw your attention to this organisation as well as a sidebar, but I'm going to come back to these lot over the coming weeks. This is Flint Global, which is a strategic consulting business which advises international businesses and investors on policy, politics, regulation and competition. So very expensive, polished advice from people with very privileged positions in the establishment, not least the co-founders. So first of all, this guy, this is Sir Simon Fraser, who, as well as being a co-founder of Flint, spent a long time in the Foreign Office. He was the head of the UK Foreign Office and Diplomatic Service. So he ran the whole embassy network for the British government. And he's also now currently the chair of Chatham House. Yeah, so he has a dual role here, making a lot of money with Flint while also enormously influencing policy at Chatham House. And then more pertinent to today's presentation, Ed Richards, who is also a co-founder of Flint, whilst being chair at Nesta in the Behavioural Insights team. So between these two, that is an extraordinary amount of influence coalesced into one place, one organisation. You've got the kind of blue-blooded establishment of Chatham House and the neoliberal progressives of the Behavioural Insights team together in one place. And as I say, we'll come back to Flint Global. I just wanted to register that with you because that will give you a little bit more context to what we're going to talk about as it relates to Nesta Live. But let's hear now from Ed Richards, chair of Nesta and the Behavioural Insights team, talking about the challenges facing the political classes in the UK in 2025.
Firstly, there is a frustration in the country that we can't somehow quite agree how to tackle the important problems of the age. That is partly a problem of the polarised politics of the age, but it is certainly a problem. The second would be that there seems to me to be a widespread concern that somehow some challenges are now almost insoluble, that they're just almost too difficult for us to solve. The third would be a concern, a worry that somehow government itself can't effect change in the way that it once could. It seems to find it harder and harder to address some of the complex challenges that we face. And fourthly, that the state itself, the state writ large, struggles to implement quickly and efficiently policy, even when policy objectives are in fact agreed and clear. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday in France, and she said to me that France is in fact now almost ungovernable. And it reminded me for a moment of the debates in the 70s about the UK being ungovernable. Some of you will remember them. I don't think you could say that about the UK, not with a government with such a clear and strong majority. But there is a concern, I think, about the degree to which government can govern in a way that meets the challenges of our age.
Government can't govern. Some challenges are insoluble. We cannot solve them. Government can't affect change. The state can't even implement policy when it's got a clear mandate to do so. And apparently he thinks that the UK should be governable because Labour has a mandate, apparently, even though they got about 20% of the vote or something like that. I'm rather jealous of the French, actually, because apparently France is ungovernable. And I think that's probably something that we should aspire to. I don't know.
I think it's got a lot to be said for it.
Yes.
And it shows that the French spirit is causing problems.
Yeah.
We tend to be more docile.
I think we do, yeah.
The problem.
Absolutely. So anyway, they're gonna try though, right? So they're going to try and govern us, and we'll have a little look at some of the ways in which they're going to do that. Up on stage next, we had this crowd. Heather Stewart on the left there, economics editor of The Guardian. David Halpin, very familiar to regular viewers of UK Column, the guy that started the Nudge Unit for David Cameron back in 2010. Polly Curtis from Demos. Interesting to see Demos in Sandy's segment there again. We're going to have to come back to that in extra. And then this chap up on the right-hand side there, that's Antonio Silva from Nesta. And he's there to talk about something called social capital, right? And essentially what they're doing here is saying, well, if the government can't fix things, which is what Ed Richards just said, then maybe society can fix things, but we've still got to justify our existence in our fancy office in central London with our well-paid jobs. So let's run this big survey to go and see if we can understand the UK society from an anthropological perspective. And this is all done in the context of essentially cultural Marxism. So he talks about these three forms of capital: economic capital, what you have; human capital, what you know; and social capital, this new thing they're introducing, which is all about who you know, and looking at social networks. And his kick-off point there on the left-hand side, you can see is Das Kapital by Marx, right? So these are Marxists in London developing government policy,
with huge amounts of money.
Huge amounts of money. I mean, we're talking, I think Nesta's got in the region of £500 million in its endowment. It's hugely wealthy, extravagant office right next to JP Morgan's office on the Embankment in central London. And this is what they spend their time doing, right? And what do they run? They run this a national study to look at 6 billion friendships in the UK. Now look at this, social capital, reading from the top lines. They looked at social networks of 58% of the UK population. So it's 20.5 million anonymised Facebook users.
Well, were they?
Well, I mean,
Were they
Facebook has been quite public about the fact that it doesn't know what it does with your data. They didn't build that platform for privacy, and they're allowing, this is a formal partnership with Facebook, by the way, I'll come on to that in a minute, they're allowing this organisation access to 20 million user profiles to look at relationships between all these different people, focusing on what they call economic connectedness. So looking at high-income friends that low-income people have. So they're trying to understand the connections between different strata in society. They're also looking at things like social mobility, which comes from a different data set. And then they ran a survey looking at well-being, which is about satisfaction, life satisfaction, how much people trust each other. That comes from a separate survey. And actually, it was quite entertaining because he was rather disappointed that actually in the UK, friendships do bridge economic divides. Significantly more so than in other countries, which I don't think is what he was expecting to find out. There's enormous diversity in the population. The class divide is actually much less entrenched than people think. People from the lower levels of society have lots of friends in the upper levels of society, or certainly the higher earning levels of society, I think we should probably say. And the entertaining thing for me about this is what you get with these studies is that it's all done on data. And they never actually say, we went out and spoke to some people.
Yes,
it's all spreadsheet based, basically. And we didn't find an issue, but we're still going to make a load of interventions. So we then end up with, we've got to redraw all the school catchment areas, and we've got to create a new community ownership fund, and we've got to get government investment for socially mixed sports facilities. Even though there's not really anything particularly wrong in the country, we've got to intervene in it anyway, because obviously we need to, as I said before, justify our resistance. And obviously this guy, he's not English. So his name is Antonio Silva. So I'm guessing he's Spanish or Portuguese, potentially. I'm not sure. Martin Wessel was the guy I worked with. Sounds like a German name to me. And actually Halpern, in the response to this, makes some comment about not liking the way that Anglo-Saxons position park benches, and actually thinking that he would need to intervene to change that, which is, just kind of astonishing, really. Given the fact that they haven't found an issue with the class divide, I think they kind of got down to business and really opened up what this was all about when they started to talk about immigration. Let's have a little listen to this.
Is this also part of the recipe for dealing with absorbing quite large-scale immigration in the way that we've had, and forming more cohesive groups, or not dividing, or dealing with some of the issues that Polly was sort of gesturing at there? That is this part of the recipe for forming closer connections, whatever your background, whatever your...
It has been historically. There's another commission, there's several running at the moment, but one on community and cohesion, which is looking at some of those issues more broadly. And it took its first evidence session, and I would say it was a fantastic presentation. Somebody, a reasonably well-known figure, but who grew up in the East End or whatever, but was contrasting about how, you look back at his father's generation, whatever. If you're in East End, it was a melting pot for lots of reasons. As he rather elegantly put it, we all learn a bit of Yiddish and we smoke a bit of pot, and it's like you can see it happening. But then in contrast, what also happened in a lot of those periods, if you go back 2-3 generations, you get a lot of areas which are actually white only in other parts of the country, and actually they're the ones that are really most worried normally about immigration, so where you don't see those populations. So it's not just a sort of contact hypothesis writ large, but it looks a lot like it, right?
Yeah.
It's not a real world example, but we're running a big program on deliberative policy making around immigration at the moment. And all the evidence shows that if you bring people with very broad opinions together in a safe space and a really powerful deliberative process, there is a natural moderation that happens in those processes, and people find kind of compromises and ways through. And it's what we talk about, kind of like a MIMBY majority kind of effect, that actually at the moment our kind of public debate is being so driven by the extremes. When you bring people together without those kind of like extreme drivers in the room, people find kind of ways through those very kind of seemingly toxic debates.
Arrogance is what I pick up, Ben.
Yes.
Unbelievable arrogance.
Yes.
They are the intellect, and those other people are not capable of making sensible decisions.
Well, they're to be managed and cajoled and moved around, and it's really the white-only areas that are the problem. But if you get your hands around them and kind of force them into it, then ultimately the whole thing kind of moves along, right? Really, really. It's not just arrogant, it's actually destructive, right? And I use this term. Where has it gone? Oh, hang on a minute. There we are. This. Cultural genocide. It's actually what we're talking about here, right? It's ethnocide. It refers to the deliberate and systematic destruction of a group's culture, religion, and identity. That's what they're doing. Right, and it gets delivered in this kind of glib, air-conditioned, well-upholstered, metropolitan, elitist fashion. But that's actually what's happening behind the scenes, right? That's what these people are up to. And let's have a quick look at the civil service. I've completely blown the clock, I'm afraid. So I don't know if we're still doing the cattle prod, I'm probably going to get it. But it's definitely worth having a look at. Really kind of an all-star cast, actually, for this session, which ran in the afternoon. So this is about the civil service of the future. You have their various perm sex secretaries. So I just flick on, we can see Ed Richards comes back. He's hosting the thing on the left-hand side there. We then have Gus O'Donnell, formerly known as God, who was the cabinet secretary under Cameron, I believe it was, for many years. And then Dame Tamara Finkelstein on the end there, who's just left DEFRA, where she was permanent secretary. And then Susan Ackland Hood in the middle, who's the permanent secretary of the Department for Education. This was really interesting, actually. I've got to say, like a kind of glimpse into what's going on in the civil service. Gus O'Donnell was quite forthright. We're going to run a clip of him in a moment. But basically, he said that we're at a stage where more than ever before, people want the government to do things, but they don't trust the government. And I actually think that this is an issue. They want stuff done. They're looking around, and the government is the thing that's there. What they don't realise is actually we need to sort the stuff out for ourselves. Government should have nothing to do with most of the issues that it's getting involved in. Ackland Hood delivered a classic civil service line where she said, "The civil service is getting better, but the world is getting worse faster." It's not our fault. And then Finkelstein, she's concerned about change, actually, and this idea that maybe they might be bringing political appointees in to run civil service departments like they do in the US. And she was kind of terrified, actually, that someone like Farage might come in and start messing around with the top levels of the civil service. But Gus O'Donnell delivered some rather brutally honest thoughts about what change actually means when proposed by politicians. So let's have a listen.
What does structural change mean in the context of that kind of challenge from the political leadership?
I would start by saying the Prime Ministers, when they say those sorts of things, have absolutely no idea of the answer to that question. Right? When they talk about rewiring the state, they honestly don't know what how do you want to do this? What are you thinking about? Nothing. So you do need to realise as a civil servant that, and this sometimes people forget, it's an incredibly political job, right? You do have to understand the way in which politicians work, what matters to them, and how to think about, for example, on delivery, how to get them interested in delivery. It's every Prime Minister I've ever worked with is like, ooh, another foreign trip. Oh, this is good. They treat me really well. The foreign press ask me proper questions about policy. It's great. And I've left behind all those fights about, oh my God, the internal party fights. So you can understand why they get really attracted to doing foreign policy. And you have to drag them back to the domestic stuff.
I just say, I enjoyed that because he's clearly been out of office for quite some time because he was very honest about his interactions with prime ministers who basically don't know anything. It sounds about right.
This is true. While that video was playing, I was having a look at a UK column printed newspaper from 2011 where we were warning that the Cabinet Office was working with the French to implement political applied psychology to change the way people thought and behaved. And of course, Gus O'Donnell was one of the key attendees in that 17th of December meeting. The meeting was actually December 2010, but UK column reported on it 2011. Dangerous stuff.
Absolutely, and so many of the same characters have just been there consistently through the piece. I'll just wrap up very quickly with what came up at the end of the day. This is very important. We're hearing a lot of talk over the past few days about digital ID schemes, and the kind of the blockbuster one that's always held up is the Indian one. And they had this guy, Dr. Pramad Varma, who presented. He was the chief architect for the digital ID scheme in India. It's a huge program. They've built a social credit system in their enormous country, 1.4 billion people, 22 languages, 12 religions, and they've transformed it through what they call formalization, especially bringing people formally into the economy. They've brought 1 billion people into the economy that weren't recognized, like they didn't know who these people were at all, and they're now being brought in. Obviously, this is presented as a good thing, so they can now participate in the marketplace and be given lots of money through digital payments and government benefits and that kind of thing. But ultimately, a lot of it is about what you can see on the right-hand side there, taxation. Now we know you, we can tax you, and we can exert influence and power over you. It's a big part of it. They developed the whole technical architecture. It's been successful. It's been implemented. It's public-private partnership. They're rolling it out to the entire society, essentially. And this is right at the top of the agenda for UK government, and they're looking at India to help them implement this. So that was an important part of the day that I thought I'd just end on.
Thank you very much for that, Ben. And lots to talk about in UK Column Extra after today's news. Let's just move on with a big thank you to everybody who's supporting UK Column and taking up a monthly membership or an annual membership with us, or purchasing through the shop or making donations. If you're not already doing that, just go to the UK Column website and click here to support our work. We're immensely grateful for all of the tremendous support we get. Now, we'd just like to say that things continue to move towards the 18th of October for UK Column on Location. We are really excited about this event. Now, as we've been saying for some time now, we are sold out of tickets, but you do have the opportunity to view it live stream. So think about that. If you're not able to attend in person, but you still want to join in with proceedings, we'd love to have you there. And you can get onto the UK Column website for a live ticket. Now, I need also to mention that although we're sold out of tickets, we have got a reserve list. And we know that sometimes, due to circumstance, people can't actually attend on the day. If possible, we'll try and help them do something about that. We can't guarantee to do that. But if you're not on the reserve list, you might choose to put yourself on that list. And should a ticket become available, then we can deal with that on a first come, first served basis. Also like to say that there's one bed in a twin room, which is also now available. That would be for a lady. If you are interested in attending and you're happy to share, get in contact via office@ukcolumn.org. And coming up, we've got Germ Warfare tonight at 7 o'clock, and that's Sasha Ladapova on COVID, Trump, CIA and the military. And Tuesday at 1 p.m, we've got an interview that Mike conducted, and the subject is Croatia not willingly going to war. Now, this is with a gentleman who's a political commentator in Croatia, and this is really good because we're getting the truth of the matter out from inside the country itself. Now, I'm delighted to say that we've been engaging with a little bit of an artistic initiative, and let's have a look at this little clip to understand more.
1,000 Words is coming to UK Column. Watch Katie Jo Murphy, co-founder of Hope Sussex, sit for her portrait whilst deep diving into life, the universe and everything. First episode airs this weekend on UK Column.
Well, there you
Culture.
have it. That should be extremely interesting.
That is great.
And we'll see how that one pans out. Now, you wanted a little bit of comment on Full Fact here.
Oh, yes. No, this is a bit of fun we're going to have next week. Get it in your diaries. 5 p.m. till 7 p.m, 29th of September. Full Fact CEO. Chris Morris is doing, very bravely, I should say, doing an AMA, an Ask Me Anything session on Reddit. And we're going to go along and ask him lots of very polite and pointed and intelligent and probing questions to account for himself.
Good.
See you there.
We encourage people to join that. Okay, Sandi, let's bring you back in and tell us a bit about this Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act.
This was flagged up to me. I didn't know anything about it really, because all this legislation goes through our Parliament, and there's so much of it. How can you keep up? So a couple got in touch with me. Their UK column. They follow UK column, and they've got two businesses, and they received a letter from Companies House, and it's explaining the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, and they were quite shocked because the letter from Companies House said, Companies House are imposing a new legal requirement that all directors and PSCs, persons with significant control, verify their identity. This is being transitioned in sort of a gradual way, starting with directors and companies. Directors are required to obtain a unique identifier known as Companies House Personal Code. The Companies House Personal Code will be used when setting up directors on company incorporations and adding directors to Companies House. Companies House also needs to gather the Companies House Personal Code for all existing directorships. This being done via the company's confirmation statement. Confirmation statement confirms in part that the list of directors stored at Companies House is correct. The Companies House Personal Code for each director will be submitted with the confirmation statement, and the requirement starts for all confirmation statements submitted on or after the 18th of November 2025. So this is really rolling out from November the 18th. We're willing to write to you as our main contact for the company so that you can provide us with the Companies House Personal Code for all directors of the company. Without the personal code, all directors will not be able to submit any confirmation statement on or after the 18th of November 2025. Now, this, they're saying that it's all for your benefit to stop fraud and all sorts of corruption, but actually it feeds right into the whole digital ID. That we understand, the reasons behind that. And then he got a reply from his accountant, because he gave it to his accountant. And it says, the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act became law by passing through both the UK Parliament and House of Lords, receiving royal assent from King on 26, 2023. This legislative process involved the government introducing the bill, followed by extensive debate, review and amendments by Parliament for its final approval and enactment into law. More importantly, the position procedurally as a result of the provisions of the Act is that over the next 2 years, any company that has any director who does not have a personal Companies House identity code will be automatically closed by Companies House. Currently, company directors therefore appear to have four choices. 1, do nothing and let all the companies they are director of be closed. 2, resign their directorships. 3, close the companies they're a director of and trade as individuals. Or 4, get their personal ID code and continue as normal. We will obviously support you as best we can, whatever you choose to do. So, he's between a rock and a hard place, this bloke, because he's saying, I really don't agree to doing this ID verification. He's quite rightly knows it's feeding into the whole digital ID, but he wants to carry on running his company. So it's be interesting to see if anybody else gets in touch in the same position. And what we really need is a mass non-compliance of all this, obviously, with everything to do with digital ID.
Correct, Sandi. And yes, it's onerous, the speed that this is coming in, and it's going to affect any and everybody in business. So it's time to stand up and challenge it. Ben, let's bring you back in, and you've been looking at the creation of rage in society.
Yeah, that's all we look at, isn't it? Yes, rage bait. Take a deep breath, everyone. We're under attack online. Tread carefully. Give it 24 hours, 48 hours. Find out what the full story is before you get too triggered by things like I did yesterday. There was this video going around, and I should say we're going to run it, but it's been edited, and that's important, which I'll come back to. But let's have a little look at this video of supposedly a police visit in the West Midlands sometime in the past few days.
Okay, what was it? Sorry, I don't like the camera. You can have my body cam. I can exhibit that to you. I just don't like the camera, really. Okay, well, I'm doing this because this is my own house and I am telling you why I'm doing it. So I just need to know why would she's basically viewed a post which is not an arrestable offence. That's good. Okay. It happened in May and you're completely fine. The only thing is we need to seize the phone at this current moment. The phone needs to get seized from us, otherwise we will escalate this further. So but with a voluntary interview. So have you seized anyone else? Is she the only child you're picking on? Voluntary interview, you'd be able to come. Have you spoken to anyone else? No, we'll come to the station now. Do you mind letting her finish her sentence before? Does have to get further escalation, unfortunately. That's fine, we'll come to the station now. The phone isn't seized right now and we're not able to basically get the phone. We'd have to escalate this further, which means your daughter will get arrested. For what? Viewing a social media post? Is that I need to go with that in order to... No, absolutely not. What can we do to prevent destruction of evidence? I'm sorry. Lisa, that's fine. I would like you to leave now. I'd like you to leave. Lisa, this is why you're... Okay, I have nothing more to say to you. A social media post. I've got nothing more to say. I'd like you to leave. You've harassed this child enough. I'd like you to leave. Lisa, that's no worries.
How'd you feel, Brian?
Well, I can imagine that most reasonably thinking people would be incensed by that and what's actually happening. The look of the two police women, they're not dressed properly. They are apparently chasing a child. They're trying to demand a phone. They're invading somebody's house. There's a lot of components.
For viewing a social media post. And I particularly like the bit right at the start where she says, I don't like having the camera on me, even though they both stood there with cameras on.
Yes.
Right. So that's done the rounds on Twitter. A lot of people getting very annoyed about that, actually. But it's not all is not as it seems, because it was heavily edited. And actually, all credit, I must say, to Alex from Thinking Coalition, a regular guest on the UK column, who pointed out that this is all a bit odd, really, isn't it? Kind of odd watching everyone foaming at the mouth about this clip, which is the 100% predictable reaction, but nobody seems to wonder why it's heavily edited, which it was. And what it's all about, given that viewing things online isn't an offence. This seems to be a narrative play. Free speech has become the battleground issue. That's what Tommy Robinson's march was about last week, for example. And then lo and behold, within an hour or two, apparently, so predictably, the heavily edited viral clip of two police officers asking for access to a mobile phone is completely misleading. West Midlands Police come out and say, we've seen reports that we're investigating a child for viewing a social media post. This is completely false. We're investigating the creation of a fake social media account which has been used to send indecent images. And apparently what we were looking at there is an edit down from 10 minutes. Now, I don't think for a second that all of it was perfect. And the tone of the interaction was not good. But actually all I'm saying is, and this is a note to self as much as anyone else, is just take a deep breath and wait and see how things develop before getting too wound up, because it's entirely possible that was put there by nefarious actors, shall we say, in order to get a reaction. So,
we all need to be aware of this.
Yes.
Sandi, let's just bring you back, because very quickly you had a little bit of an update on digitalisation in the NHS.
Yes, I mean, it's just an update, really, because last week I spoke about how NHS Improvement, NHS Digital, NHS, what's the other one, X, they've all amalgamated to bring in this predictive, preventative, personalised and participatory medicine. So, at its core, it's all working around genetics and disease and reaching into the DNA of every person, but also gathering the data of your fitness and everything else that goes with it. Now, what they've done recently is they've they've employed the help from companies like Anima. And Anima is a digital triage and workflow management platform that's been rolled about across the GP practices in the UK. And its function is to streamline how patient requests are received, prioritised and managed. So they will be collecting all your data for your GP surgery. Now, Anima are in a huge company, a huge corporation. It was founded in 2021 by Shanika Sharma, ex-McKinsey, and Sean Pang, ex-Palantir engineer. So we know what they're up to. But why I'm coming back to this is that one of our viewers went into her local GP service to register. She's going through some health problems, and she went to just register with her GP as normal. And they wouldn't let her. They said, you have to do it through Anima. And she said, well, I don't know who Anima are. And she did a quick search, I think, and had a look. And she said, no, why would I share my personal data with a third party? I share my data with my GP. And she refused. And it caused a big stir in the surgery. And they eventually, they were arguing with her for quite a long time. And eventually they gave up and they allowed her to do her own registration through the GP surgery. So this is a lesson to all of us to, if we don't want to go along with all this nonsense, we can refuse. Just say no.
Sandi, brilliant. That's absolutely right. And if more people did that, that would be excellent. People can also make a difference by supporting people who are doing the right thing. And both the lady and the gentleman that spoke out in the House of Lords against the assisted dying bill, they need your support. They need our support, because if they're heading down the right path, knowing that large numbers of people are supporting what they're doing is going to increase their confidence, and they're going to do more and bring more people on board. So if you're thinking, what can I do? Two options there. One is say no when you get the opportunity, and the other one is to support people who are doing the right thing. Now, we did promise with a little bit of uplifting black humour, we would end on having a little look at BBC shorts. This is just one that caught my eye. Let's have a look at the BBC giving the public serious information.
I went to San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and I shadowed this incredible founder and just spent all day sort of walking around in his meetings, his hands-on. And it was fascinating how quick decisions are made and actioned, and you know what impact that's going to have in tech. You know, it's quite profound. And so it was really interesting.
Whitney is a legendary entrepreneur. She truly helped completely change the world of dating apps. Knowing what you know now about them behind the scenes, do you see them as a force for good or the opposite, or in the middle?
Well, I see them as a force. My brother met his wife on a dating app. So really. So I'll be forever grateful for my sister-in-law, Stacey. And also what Whitney did was so key, because she re-engineered these dating apps to put women in the driver's seat, empower and protect women. So, that is definitely a force for good.
Well, there we are. I don't know what our audience thinks of this, but of course this is dross to be pumped into the heads of youngsters, young teenagers. I think it relates to an article which the BBC posted back in 2023. Whitney Wolfe heard how the Bumble boss changed the dating scene, and apparently this has changed the dating scene to make it much better for women. Interestingly enough, if you look at information on the dating scene online, particularly in the States, women are having more and more difficulty finding a male partner because the men are shying away from the dating apps and the dating scenes because of the way the women are behaving and looking for a male partner. And I think it'll be very interesting to get into what's actually happening between men and women in more detail in forthcoming, not only UK column news, but some of our interviews, because it's a very hot topic. But there we are, a giggly end to the news provided by the BBC. Ben, thank you very much for joining me. Sandi, huge thank you. And thank you for that very concise update on the dangers of the assisted dying bill. Thank you to everybody who's joined us today. We must end there. If you're a member of UK Column, join us for UK Column Extra shortly. See you then. Bye-bye.